Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. It is one of those situations once again that I spoke about in recent videos. We've seen that a lot lately when experts are saying something that is in contradiction to what the government wants to push, then all of a sudden they're ignored or they're not real experts. And right now the question is, should young people between the ages of 12 and 16 be given the jab? Should that be recommended? Is it making sense? Is it safe? Does it have a purpose? Is it morally justified? Etc. That is the question in Germany at the moment. And our government, the central government around Angela Merkel, they have made a decision now. They said that they don't care what the experts say. We will ignore what the German experts say. We just want these young people to get the jab as fast as possible. And they also try to link that to whether or not the schools can open up again in September in the new school year, or maybe if those children who haven't gotten the jab yet can go to school or not. They're trying to use this stick or carrot, this is more the stick kind of approach here, to kind of bully and intimidate the parents first. As you guys know, in the US, these young people, this age bracket is already blessed with the wonders of the pharmaceutical industry, but here in Germany so far they haven't received this blessing just yet. In today's video, I want to tell you what I got about this conflict in the media from Germany, what the experts are saying, what the mainstream news allows to be spread in Germany. And then in the second step, in the second part of the video, I go one step further and I do what German journalists are refusing to do at the moment, and that is to ask simple questions, or if they have a middle school education at least, to give those answers to the public right away. And that is why these studies that have been conducted in the United States that were supposed to show the effectiveness of these pharmaceutical products in the concrete case of this very young age bracket is completely ridiculous, and their statistical and scientific value is exactly zero. And this is not just my opinion, this is exactly the opinion of these German experts that I will introduce right now. And I will show that from first principles. You don't need to be a medical doctor, it is just plain simple mathematics. Alright, but first I want to thank all my supporters and my subscribers. Like, share and subscribe, and if you like, you can support my channel via Patreon or Subscribestar. The links are in the descriptions down below. Alright, so who are these experts? I'm talking about the Ständige Impfkommission. Abbreviation is STIKO in German, and that is the Standing Committee on Vaccination. These are a group of, I think, 18 at the moment, independent experts who are meeting twice a year in order to give recommendations to the federal states when it comes to these questions. Immunization for certain groups like workers abroad, travelers, or certain risk groups, and so on. So they are the go-to expert group in Germany when it comes to these things. And they do not give a recommendation for young people yet. They haven't done that yet. They went on record to say that this immunization is a serious medical procedure. It is not just like giving a child candy. They said not just like a lakritz bonbon, which is, I think, how would you say that? That is a licorice drop. So they do point out that 1.3% of the subjects will have adverse effects from it, and they also say that it is not very clear from that study that it has any positive effect for these young people at all. And as I said, I will explain that in the end. The European Office for Pharmaceuticals, EMA, meanwhile already approved certain pharmaceutical products here from certain companies from the US and Germany for this young age group. And so the federal government in Germany said, let's go. That means that the German politicians are acting directly against or without the recommendations of their highest and most important advisory board. They are basically science deniers at this point. Alright, so as I said already, the experts from the STIKO, they said that this study from the US that also the European office here has used as their basis for their decision is not sufficient. The data is not sufficient. What does that mean? I want to explain that to you. What they did is they had roughly 1,000 test subjects as a reference group that was given a placebo, and they had roughly 1,000 children in that age group in their test group. They were given the vaccine, and then they checked for effects 14 days or 6 months afterwards, and they counted or they looked what happened. And the outcome now was that 16 children had a positive PCR test in the reference group and 0 had a positive PCR test apparently in the test group. But what does that tell us now? Well, it tells us nothing. And the reason is quite simply that the number of test subjects, 1,000 each, is just too low, because in this age group there are hardly any cases there, and if there are any cases, they have virtually no negative or severe effects whatsoever. And if you are just having a headache, then, well, you get that from the jab too. So it's really the same thing. And I also wouldn't recommend to take an untested pharmaceutical product just to avoid a headache. So I want to put these numbers into perspective now. I looked up the data on how many mortalities we had in such an age group overall in all of Germany. So for more than a year now. And the answer in that age group from 10 to 19 years is 9 people. In that group we have roughly 750,000 per year, and for 10 years that would mean out of 7.5 million young people, 16 were dying in over a year with a positive PCR test. Not from, but with a positive PCR test. The group of people that we're talking about now is half the size. We're talking about 12 to 16, so 5 years, and that would mean we have to divide that number by 2. So we have 4.5 fatalities here. If you wanted to conduct a study that has scientific or even statistical relevance and significance, I would just demand that you have at least 100 severe outcomes in your reference group. Otherwise, your statistics is just ridiculously low. So 9 deaths out of 7.5, that is a little more than 1 per million. If you want 100 of negative outcomes, as I said, you would need 100 million young people in your reference group and another 100 million young people in your test group. You need 200 million young people in order to conduct such a study, and they did it with 1,000. That is 5 orders of magnitude off. That is ridiculous. That is crazy. Or to put it another way, in more easier terms, you cannot conduct a study that looks for the effectiveness or the dangers of some drug that is used against some disease when the reference group doesn't show any severe symptoms from that disease. It just can't be done because you would divide by 0. And that leads to some problems. And you don't even need high school statistic classes that I still remember from my German high school education. Middle school math is already absolutely sufficient to understand this very fundamental truth. And this is, of course, what the experts mean when they say the number of test subjects is too low. And I just spelled it out in a little more detail for you. It is not just that they wished, oh, maybe they could have used 2,000 or maybe 5,000. No, they would have needed 200 million young people if they wanted to come even close to making a statistically relevant statement here. So we do not know if this jab has even any sort of positive effect for these young people, and we do not know if it has any negative effect. We just don't know, because the study was done with just 2,000 young people. So now they're saying, well, these young people, they have a moral obligation because they can also maybe infect someone. But no, I would say no. These young people have no moral obligation when they are not for other reasons in a risk group. And by the way, the STIKO already recommended the jab for young people if they are, because of an illness or some condition, in a traditional risk group for the China bug. So that they did already. We're talking about healthy young people here that have no other risk factors. And these people, I would say, no, you don't have an obligation to take that risk for yourself, because this jab has no benefit for you, but it might have some very severe side effects that you just don't know yet, or that we do actually know already. So the head of our ethics committee in Germany, she talks about the responsibility and the obligation of young people towards society. I think this is absolutely ridiculous. What kind of ethics board is that? These young people have no obligation towards society in this context. This puts their health at risk and they gain nothing from it. As I already said, in my opinion, you should maybe give that jab to everybody who is really old or in a risk group, and then just leave it at that. I mean, leave young and healthy people alone, because if that jab is so great as you're telling the people, then it doesn't matter if that pathogen persists for a couple of months or something, if all the people who are at risk from suffering any real critical damage from it are vaccinated, so who cares? Alright, so I hope I could show you exactly how ridiculous this study with these 2,000 young people is, when the reference group or young people in general just don't have that disease, and they also, if they, in very rare cases when they have that disease, the frequency of serious effects or symptoms is almost zero. And this is why you would need ridiculously high sample sizes in order to make any statements about anything at all. Only the side effects, I would say, those we would see. Yeah, so the effectiveness you cannot see, but the side effects you would actually see with a smaller sample size already, of course. And the result here was 1.3%, if I remember correctly. So the side effects are kind of in the box, but then the effectiveness is absolutely questionable. There is basically nothing we know about that. So I should also add that it is very curious that they picked not severe effects as their criterion, but they just counted positive PCR tests, because I guess there were exactly 0 cases in the reference group that had any severe effects from the illness. So they had to resort to using just positive PCR tests. But isn't that also a strange result, that they had 0 positive PCR tests then in the test group? Because didn't they tell us for all this time that you can still carry the pathogen and you can actually still infect people even after getting the jab? So from whichever angle you look at this, it is stinking to the high heavens. The story doesn't add up. And as I showed to you, this study is poorly done, and it has, for statistical reasons, the relevance of that study is precisely 0. And it also tells a story that they had to resort to using positive PCR tests instead of actual symptoms or even mortalities, because there are none in that age group, quite frankly. I want to leave it at that. Give me your comments down below. Servus, Kameraden.